Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bethel, can you give me a brief rundown, if you can, kind of keep it brief because I think we could have a long conversation about it, about how the PRC uses its power to infiltrate our financial systems to its advantage and to our disadvantage. And I want to have a broader discussion with the rest of the panel about that.
Where to begin?
Yeah.
First of all, let's provide context and understand what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is we have a free and open system, and our financial managers, hedge fund managers, Wall Street professionals have an obligation. And their obligation is to provide a rate of return to their pensioners. They have a fiduciary and a moral obligation. So the challenge that we have is to tell them you can't invest in China, because they'll say, well, don't blame the player, blame the game. My job is to create a rate of return. Now, what I find very ironic about the situation is that those same players that are quadrupling down on ESG are also quadrupling down on China. Every letter in that acronym stands for something. E stands for the environment. Having lived in China 10 years, I can assure you that I may have lost years of my life just breathing the air, right? S stands for social. And clearly what's happening in Tibet, in Xinjiang, in other places don't reflect a positive social outcome for the Chinese people. And G stands for governance. You may ask yourself, how do there exist private companies in China when the government can strip you of your CEO and disappear your senior leadership? So what I don't understand is how you can be for ESG and at the same time for China. I've been arguing this case for years, but we now find ourselves in a situation where many of these financial managers have lost money to the tune of $2–3 trillion over the last several years. One company alone, an American company, NVIDIA, I was going to say thank you to Ms. Brown, but she left, but NVIDIA has a higher market capitalization than the entire stock market of China, and that's happened over 2 years. So the word of caution is to our financial community is be aware of what you're dealing with. And I find it also objectionable that Chinese companies listed in the United States don't file proper PCAOB accounting standards. How is that possible?
So how is that possible? And I suspect if I talk to each one of you, including my former colleague here, all with the best of intention, you know, to counteract the Belt and Road Initiative, we need to use things like the International Development Finance Corporation. We need to compete against China where they're competing. It costs the American people more money. But what you just described, the unequal playing field, where American companies must comply, Chinese companies don't have to, they're advantaged. And the answer is the taxpayers got to pay more, where if we just shut off we're funding our own demise. We're funding our own demise. Ms. Kissel, I'm sure you have plenty of examples. Captain, I don't know if that's your wheelhouse, no pun intended, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I feel like there's an answer right in front of us, which is relatively inexpensive from an output, right? It's going to cost everybody something, right, if you're not getting cheap Chinese goods. But we're going to take the cheap Chinese goods while allowing them to abuse our system, and which they literally finance their operation, that we're asking our American taxpayers to then finance the opposition, which is ridiculous.
Well, I think Erik hit on an important concept that could be applied across agencies, and that's the concept of transparency. And as you say, fair and equal treatment. We shouldn't give China special advantages, because communist China, it's a party state. We don't use that terminology, but we should. It doesn't function like our economy.
It's a criminal state, is what it is.
Every economic activity accrues to the party's benefit, and the party's goal is to upend our way of life and to dominate and change our way of life. I believe that these listing standards should be changed. I believe that the State Department should issue very clear guidance on the risks of traveling and doing business with China. It's very confusing. I get a lot of questions from clients about this, saying, well, should I go? Should I continue to invest? What are the risks? We should explain that very clearly. I think transparency goes a long way, and I also think, frankly, that it's unconscionable that you have federal employees, pension funds, going to companies that uphold the party state that is committed to destroy us. That's insane.
So
We
who
should stop
has
that.
the sole power? Who, if anybody, I know, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude here. Who has the sole power to even the playing field? We're not saying, what I'm saying is that there should be reciprocity. If it's good for them, it's good for us. If they allow it, we'll allow it. But if they won't allow it, we won't allow it. Who has the sole authority?
Here's the challenge. There's not a single answer to your question. It's a very complex and complicated threat. The SEC has to deal with it. Commerce has to deal with it. The National Security Council, State Department, all arms of the federal government have to deal with it. But also, state governments have to deal with it because the CCP is conducting influence operations and softening up our local and
Allow them
state
to not follow the rules. Allowing them to not follow the rules. All those agencies have to change that?
This has to be an all-of-government effort,
Thank you,
in my
ma'am.
opinion.